So thank you for the organizers for putting this wonderful workshop together. I'm excited to be presenting part of my dissertation here, which is still work in progress. So I look forward to your comments and questions in the end of this panel. So, globally, Islamic finance has expanded in a few short decades into $1.3 trillion global market. Moreover, according to the latest State of the Global Islamic Economy report in 2013, the global Muslim spending on food and beverages reached $1,292 billion. This making the halal food market to be 17.7% of the global expenditure in the same year. And if you look at very similar reports, you'll find many other indicators of how the Islamic economy is expanding globally. And in the Central Asian region, as most of the people in the audience here today know very well, these trends have also been on the upswing. So the researchers on Islam in Central Asia, they have noted how starting from mid-1990s and throughout, inflows of a vast array of commodities, ideas, and imageries altered the local economic and religious landscape. The liberalization of the economy fulfilled its promise, at least in the sense of filling local markets with commodities, including prayer beads, posters of Mecca, literature on Islam, and so on and so forth, right? Basically making kind of not just the ideas, but also the material substance of Islam available to the religiously inclined in Central Asia. Some other researchers also note, of course, the attendance at mosques that has gone up, along with many other aspects of an Islamic lifestyle, such as giving sadaqah and zakat, which are charitable practices prescribed by Islam, and pilgrimage to Mecca, which has already been noted today by other presenters. So existing studies, so my project is on Islamic economy, mostly with the focus on Kyrgyzstan, but I also did part of my research in Kazakhstan. And it was interesting because once I started kind of looking at the literature that exists, right, a lot of authors look at different contexts like Egypt, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the common terms that kind of jump out from the literature are the following, right? Islamic neoliberal ethic, Islamic neoliberal assemblage, market Islam, pious neoliberalism. So basically the core point of the literature is that, look, Islam is not antithetical to capitalism. Pious sensibilities can be merged with capitalist orientations, right? And with forward-looking kind of mode of what is efficient, what can increase productivity, and so on and so forth. So for instance, Mona Atta looks at charitable organizations in Egypt, and she basically makes the same kind of point that all of these charitable organizations that are on the one hand concerned with mostly how do we increase sadaqah, right, practices. But at the same time, they actually merge, right, very much market model of how to run these charitable organizations. So her research is basically in that. And then Daromir Rudnitsky did a research on Krakatau steel factory in Indonesia, and he basically looks at managerial practices of this factory and says, well, it's basically market Islam. Once again, the point being that these managers are employing, right, Islam in basically in the hopes that the factory workers will become more docile, more also kind of devoted to the idea that they can promote Indonesian Muslim market globally, right? So basically that's kind of the point. But another key point that the literature makes is that, once again, Islamic economy is more about kind of neoliberalism, right? Neoliberalism as a project is very malleable, and so it finds different venues through which to actually expand. So in this case, it's expanding through Islam. In my study, I wasn't very satisfied. I mean, the literature is very rich. It gives us very valuable insights, but still, it kind of runs short in explaining how a faith-based market becomes something imaginable, thinkable, and plausible, right? How do knowledge, theories, and practice of moral and ethical business travel get validated and enforced, right? How do all of a sudden we have all these budding entrepreneurs, right, implementing Islamic economy, whatever that means for them. So part of my project was really understanding how do these entrepreneurs themselves conceptualize what constitutes Islamic or ethical or moral business for them, and how do they try to implement that in practice. So with these questions in mind then, what I did was, so I'm myself a sociologist, so I looked at the economic sociology literature and political sociology literature. So what I draw from these two strands of research is two major concepts that I would like to present here. One is moral futures, right? So moral futures is about this imaginative framework through which market actors envision future state of things and aspire toward anticipated goals. So instead of kind of pure economic, pure rationality-based, right, models of economic behavior, right, that we usually get from Economy 101 or whatever class that you may take in that field. It's usually kind of the instrumentality and the rationality, right, that is key for them. Whereas here, the moral futures concept really leaves space to interpreting what rationality actually is, right? So actors may have a very utilitarian goal of achieving a certain end, right? They may aspire towards a certain goal, but to do that, they need to first of all believe in that that's actually plausible and that can be desirable, that model can be desirable. And the second concept is articulations. So basically, it's the work of key actors who identify these social cleavages. So some of our speakers already mentioned, right, how Islam is so diverse. There are so many factions. They interpret Islamic tenets in so many different ways, right? So basically, the concept of articulation is about how these cleavages between mazhabs or whatever different schools of thought, they do not necessarily exist, right, on the ground. They need to be articulated by certain key actors, such as in this particular case, I'm focusing on the imams, right? How they need to actually make these cleavages visible, right, for people, so that they can say, oh, okay, if I'm Hanafi, then I have to be doing this. Or if I'm some other version of Muslim, then I have to be following some other practices. So basically, those are the two core concepts. The data for this particular chapter that I'm presenting here draws from 25 in-depth interviews with imams, primarily in Kyrgyzstan, and entrepreneurs, about 80 entrepreneurs, some of which were based in Kazakhstan. So here, what I would like to argue is that that basically imams serve as business ethicists, right? And by business ethicists, I mean someone whose job it is to increase the frequency of moral behavior in business, either in the business community as a whole or within one or more particular companies. So once again, in my chapter, I talk about how the authority and reputation of imams is not necessarily automatically granted to them, right? There is a lot of tension and debate. They are actually challenged on a number of factors, right? Some of which, once again, were already mentioned here, such as Hajj trips and how they're not transparent, and all kinds of corruption schemes that run in mosques, and how they appropriate all kinds of funds, and so on and so forth, right? So their reputation and authority is not necessarily granted to them automatically. But some of the factors actually play a role, right, in making them recognized as carriers of the proper Islamic knowledge and interpretations. So some of them, there are a number of factors, but some of these factors, first of all, is uncertainty, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty about how to interpret Islamic tenets, especially when it comes to business. In regards to financial transactions, for example, there is no single theory or formula of how to interpret the tenets of riba, which is basically profit based on interest, or gharar, transactions that resemble gambling. nor is there one dominant definition of what constitutes Islamic finance or business. And this is not just in Central Asia, but globally. In Central Asian case, in Kyrgyzstani case, a plethora of entrepreneurs ranging from bazaar traders to medium-sized construction companies, owners of tourist agencies, halal producers, Muslim daycare centers, they time and again always reiterated a very similar point of, we're not sure if we want to run an Islamic business, but we're not sure if we're 100% Islamic yet. So they would always make this point of kind of being uncertain yet, right? If they're doing things 100% right. So that's kind of one of the factors that I suggest plays a role in kind of making imams as one of the experts right here. And the second is the emergence of new forms of organizations, institutions, and market niches that identify as Islamic, right, or that cater to pious lifestyles. So Islamic financial institutions that were mentioned this morning, and part of my research focused on Islamic banks in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. And there, once again, these new organizations, they do require, once again, it's not just in Central Asia, it's all over the world, right? They do have to have Sharia boards that kind of oversee the financial transactions and if they actually comply to Islamic tenets. So that in itself, the emergence of these new forms of organizations and institutions required the expertise, right, of religious authorities. And finally, the third is, besides just providing their expertise, religious authorities, much like political parties, need to maintain organizational basis for mobilizing constituents. Thereby, they're concerned about mobilizing and sustaining mosques as both physical spaces and also enduring communities, right? So they're not just running on Saudi Arabian money. They need to be constantly worried about where are we going to get funds to cover our electricity bills, our madrasah, fees, and so on and so forth, right? They have to pay taxes to the muftiyat. So all of these mosque leaders are concerned about practical daily issues as well, right? So that's kind of another factor that I think contributes to their own interest in being so much integrated to the business communities on the ground. So what I do basically want to focus on today, this is just to show, once again, this speaks to my last point, right, on their concern about making sure and securing financial and all kinds of other resources. Given the huge rise in mosque numbers, once again, it's, we can see so many more people, right, being concerned about the same daily issues of how to run a mosque. So what I do want to do here is basically this, kind of moving away from the literature that I pointed out in the beginning. I think, I would like to basically classify the rhetorics and the discourse of imams into three different categories. And this is to basically identify the different types of moral futures that they emphasize, right? The different types of moral futures that they think should be important in entrepreneurs' work. And they do actually, once again, I corroborate their interviews, imams' interviews with entrepreneurial interviews, where they speak about how they implement those visions, right, that imams articulate in their own practice. So the first one is the capitalist Islam, right? So I'd like to just kind of read an episode. As we said in the office of Sheikh Mardan Ustaz, he stated, look, Islam is adaptable to whichever work. If a person is a farmer or a trader, regardless of his occupation, our religion can show him the way. One of the youngest mosque imams that I have spoken with, Sheikh Mardan Ustaz, wore a business-like attire and was cleanly shaved. He leads a mosque that also houses a religious boarding school for children from all the regions of the country. Later that week, following his recommendations, I spoke with Ni'matillah Imam, who teaches part-time at the Islamic Institute in Kyrgyzstan and leads a mosque. Ni'matillah Imam echoed my earlier respondents' views and stated that Islam can show the right way of doing business for entrepreneurs of various walks of life. They both reiterated a number of times that market economy can lead to prosperity as long as it's coupled with Islamic tenets. So basically the kind of aspiration that I suggests this particular rhetoric, right, emphasizes is basic, appreciation of market economy, because it opens up so many new opportunities. Wow. Okay. And the means for them then that they identify as discipline, industriousness, ethics that can be forged by Islam, right? So this is kind of one version of the moral future that Imams articulate. The second one, and I can talk more about it later. The second one, which is already, once again, which was already very extensively discussed today, is the ethnic national Islam, right? The majority of Imams favor the second orientation, right? Ethnic national and regional Islam, which promotes Muslimness as a natural extension of ethnic belonging and regional affiliations. This orientation draws its symbolic power and legitimacy from nationalist populism, which in the Central Asian context has interwoven Kyrgyzness or Kazakhhness with Muslim identity. The aspired future in this rhetoric is one where resources wouldn't be controlled by a few powerful entrepreneurs, especially foreign entrepreneurs and investors, and where local Muslims would prosper and build upon their distinction from the other Muslims. So in this particular category, once again, Imams would time and again kind of talk about and emphasize how their mosque was actually built by the efforts of the local community, not foreigners, or even if the foreigners had a kind of their share, right, in investing into the construction of the mosque, they do not now oversee any of their work, and that actually it's the local community that has the strong kind of say in how things are run. And they're very much kind of, I can read another episode if people are interested in the Q&A session. The third category of a moral future that the Imams kind of articulate is the salvation or the spiritually oriented Islam, right? In other words, paving the way to heaven. This orientation is primarily articulated by Imams who favor relatively autonomous religious movements such as the missionaries of Tablighi Jamaat. Among entrepreneurs, this orientation resonates with those who prioritize ethical business as a way of ensuring their place in the afterlife by prioritizing a distinct Islamic identity over profit. So one of the examples was Bilal Damla, who is a mosque leader that is known for their explicit affiliation with Tablighi Jamaat, and he himself, based on the mosque community, led a business association that grew into a huge enterprise, basically importing cars and selling them in Kyrgyzstan. But he and other members of this particular business association would time and again, once again, emphasize that for them, profit is not the priority. They actually take davat trips, right, during high seasons. And that for them was kind of a way of showing that their devotion, right, in their efforts in making sure that they're securing their, a good place in the afterlife, right? So those are just some of the practices to kind of highlight here. And since I have only 2 minutes left, in conclusion, this is just one of the quotes. Basically, yeah, I can show it to you later. In conclusion, I would like to just kind of highlight once again, right, the kinds of narratives that are integrated into these 3 types of moral futures articulated by Imams. These narratives mostly focused on how pious Muslim entrepreneurs and their deeds, what does that mean, and why should one be ethical in his or her work, right? The broader significance of these narratives is that they construct moral futures by bringing in the analogy of futures market, for instance, right, where auctions, basically futures market auctions where participants buy and sell commodities or future contracts for delivery on a specified future date, without necessarily knowing what's going to happen, right? So it's kind of very actually similar to this particular moralized market. I demonstrate how religious authorities influence the construction of these anticipated future values through their particular narratives, right? That they and ideas that they propagate among The concept of moral futures helps us to shift analytically from the phase of imagination to the phase of action. Expectations of future values, in the case of the stock market, are based on fictions, in a way, in ways in which they're articulated. In other words, it is about actors' expectations of future value in coordination of present activities accordingly. I borrow the term articulation from political sociology, as I mentioned. The key point here is that political articulation that is done by various actors, such as political parties, state leaders, and others, naturalize some identities and suppress others. So in this particular case, I show how imams, once again, integrate, right, certain communities around the kinds of identities that they want to construct. So I'll stop there. Thank you.